Hi and welcome to the Senator Brian A. Joyce Report. Today we're filming from the State House, from the cable studio here in the bowels of the State House down in the basement. And I have as a guest today one of the most capable members of our state government, Steve Grossman. I had Steve on as a candidate when he was running for Treasurer-Collector. I've mentioned in a previous show that among my responsibilities now, I chair the state's bonding committee, so all of the long-term debt obligations of the state are heard by my committee, and I've had the occasion to work with Steve Grossman now as the elected treasurer-collector, and I've been extraordinarily impressed. This guy has hit the ground running. As I said to him Saturday, I saw Steve at Curry College where he was receiving an honorary degree. I said to Steve and to his wife Barbara, what a quick study he is and how impressed we all are with him. And his wife mentioned Steve always does his homework. So I'm delighted to have with me here today Steve Grossman. Welcome.
Brian, thanks for having me back.
Well,
you know, it's interesting. You can get invited once, but to get invited back, that takes some doing. So that you're inviting me back now that I'm elected really means a lot to me.
One of the things I did mention is that the last time I had you, you had that bright orange tie on, and today you have an orange tie. Is
a different one.
A different one, okay. Is that a bit of your signature now?
Well, you know, you campaign and you establish a certain kind of a brand. I love orange. My company, Grossman Marketing Group, when we rebranded, we used orange as our color, and it did very well. And so I wanted to come up with a campaign color that didn't look like everybody else's, and not that many people use orange as a campaign color. So naturally, I wore orange ties, and I probably have 15 of them now. You saw me in a different orange tie on Saturday night at Curry College, but it's become a little bit of a signature. It absolutely has.
Well, I always use my middle initial. It's A. So whenever I sign something, it's Brian A. Joyce, and the genesis of that is my father had instilled that on me, and I think the nuns back in grammar school to honor my patron saint. But also, when I was a young elected official, there was someone with the same name as I have, a young fellow from the South Shore who was calling senior citizens in my district and folks that were in their 80s, and he was trying to sell them annuities in products that were simply not, and he was kind of trading on my name to get them to answer the phone. So that got me to redouble my effort to establish my own brand, but not as snappy as your tie. Hey, you mentioned your business experience. So you run a company, or you did run a company.
Right.
It was called, what, Mass Envelope?
It was called Mass Envelope. Started in 1910, 101 years old. And
started by who?
Started by my grandfather.
Okay.
Started in 1910, and I was in business with my father for many years. My father passed away in 99. My two older boys are now running the business, David and Ben. I got out of the business really full-time when I decided to run for treasurer, and now they run the business. First two members of the fourth generation of the company. But it's been a small business, which we grew over the years. It's a marketing communications company. So I figured in the middle of the worst recession of our lifetime, running for treasurer needed to focus on the most important thing in Massachusetts, which is jobs and helping small businesses grow and get back on their feet. And that's what we've devoted a lot of our time and attention to during these first 4 months.
You have a couple of interesting programs already in place. You have a small banking partnership,
right.
A small business banking partnership. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was really motivated out of a lot of conversations I had during the campaign. I went around the state and I sat with small business owners everywhere in the state. And I did what my father told me to do. I used my ears. My father always said, you have one mouth and two ears, use them in that proportion. So I said to these small business owners, what do you need? What are the roadblocks and barriers to growing your companies, to helping get people back on their feet, to create jobs again, to create some economic opportunity? And it was access to capital. The biggest banks aren't helping us. It's the small banks that were, and I need some help.
Well, it's interesting that some of those bigger banks made some bad decisions in the past, and some of the decisions that had no relation whatsoever to small businesses, but it made them gun shy. It made them far too hesitant, reluctant to now loan money to credit-worthy small businesses. And as you mentioned, that money it's like oxygen to these businesses to keep going.
So what happened was, as we listened to these small businesses, I came up with this idea called the Small Business Banking Partnership. And it's really simple. The taxpayers of Massachusetts have billions of dollars sitting in the bank on a daily basis. We use it to pay local aid. We use it to pay our bills. We use it for purposes that you would run a major enterprise like the Commonwealth. And this money sits in a fund, and a lot of that money sits outside the borders of the Commonwealth, and a lot of it sits outside the United States in banks that are in Australia and Switzerland and Germany and other places. So I said, let's establish a principle. Let's take Massachusetts taxpayers' money, deposit it in Massachusetts community banks to loan to Massachusetts small businesses to create jobs right here at home. So we put out some regulations. We ran them through the Mass Bankers Association. We came up with a plan that we thought would work, and we kicked this plan off just a few months ago. And so far we've got 45 banks that have signed up, meaning that they want to take up to $5 million in deposits into their banks, and all we require are three things. They need to give us a competitive interest rate, they need to protect or insure our money, and they need to agree to loan the money to small businesses all over their marketing areas. So simple regulations. We've put $55 million out already, 11 banks, $5 million each. 45 banks have signed up. That number is growing almost every week. And my guess is by the time this program has reached its first milestone around the 4th of July, we will have put a couple $100 million out there, maybe a little bit more. And that moves the needle in terms of small business lending. And almost every community in your Senate district has got a bank or a branch of a bank that is participating in this program. I think there are 7 communities.
I have it right here. So for Avon, Braintree, Randolph, Stoughton, Canton, Sharon, and East Bridgewater, those communities in my district, there's money now in the banks lending to available to small businesses,
right, particularly
as a result of this.
And if your listeners or your viewers call your office.
And my viewers, by the way, it's thousands, if not millions, so you're getting a lot of exposure.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But if your viewers call your office or call my office at Treasury and ask, what banks are there in my community that are actually part of this program, we'll be happy to share that with them.
So there's a requirement that they put this money to work with small businesses.
That is in the rules. We give them the money for 2 years, and they get to keep the money for 2 years or longer. I don't want to take that money back. I want that money to keep circulating, keep being loaned to small businesses to create jobs, to create economic opportunity, and to help those small businesses grow. There is documentation that during the worst years of the recession, it was the community banks that increased their lending and the bigger banks that cut back on their lending. So I want to reward the heroes, which are the small, local, community, and regional banks, and some of them are in your own district, and we should benefit them.
Well, terrific. So one of the responsibilities that you have as treasurer now is to handle the cash flow of the state. This money that you mentioned, it's essentially the checkbook of the Commonwealth to pay its bills. You also have responsibility for the state's pension fund and our retirement funds, which total some $41 billion.
Well, right now we've had good results over the past couple of years. So as of today, that number stands, round numbers, right at $50 billion in our state pension funds. And that's for retirees and for those who will retire someday. And obviously the big challenge is paying down our unfunded pension liabilities, which are a significant challenge, and maximizing the return for the shareholders of that pension fund, which are the ones that are going to benefit from it.
So let's talk about the first thing, the maximizing the return on that investment. So all the public employees in Massachusetts, by and large, with some exceptions, a lot of their funds are invested, their retirement, because they're not collecting Social Security. We're outside of Social Security.
Correct.
And so they have this public pension, which I think averages about $26,000 per public pensioner. Far less than I think the public perception is. What do you do to maximize the return on those pension dollars?
Well, needless to say, when you invest $50 billion, you are investing in all asset classes. You're investing in common stocks, you're investing in bonds, you're investing in venture capital, private equity, you're investing in real estate. You have investments in each of those asset classes. So we have a team of people who take a look at opportunities, and the bottom line is they are required, as part of their fiduciary responsibility, and my responsibility as the chairman of the pension board, is to maximize the value of those pension assets. So every decision we make is designed to improve the performance, and the performance, by the way, since 1986, since these pension funds were created by the state, have compounded at a rate of almost 10% a year. So we've had tremendous growth in our pension funds. Obviously, we had a very bad year in 2008. Everybody did. But in 2009, we improved by almost 18%. In 2010, by almost 14%. We're having a decent year so far. So we're trying to get rid of those unfunded
So over
pension
time, what's the
liability.
rate of return?
Rate of return specifically over a 25-year period since 1986 is 9.86%, almost 10% compounded. So that's a decent rate of return, but just because we did it in the past doesn't mean it's not a challenge to continue to do it. So that's what we go to work every day to do.
So the Treasurer mentioned something called the unfunded pension liability. And just to explain that a little bit, public employees today, I pay 11% of my salary goes in to fund my retirement. So most of us that are working today are essentially funding almost all of our retirement.
Right.
The average public pension is about $26,000, as I mentioned, and we're not eligible for Social Security. So there's a perception out there that public employees are getting rich on their pensions. Nevertheless, there are some who game the system. There are some who have taken advantage of loopholes, who have engaged, if not illegal, certainly unethical or dubious behavior to maximize their pension. That's gotten a lot of play, folks that have double dipped and such. Last year, we passed legislation that removed virtually all, but not all, virtually all of those games and those cute tricks that folks use. This year, we have perhaps an even greater challenge. The unfunded pension liability that the Treasurer spoke about really goes back to those public employees back in the day that were, say if you were in the town meeting in, Stoughton in 1965, you might know that Joe is going to be retiring from the local Department of Public Works, and let's set aside $200 a year to fund Joe's retirement, and so on. It was a kind of a pay-as-you-go or as they retire system. There was no money socked away. Now we have all of these municipal and state retirees that really weren't required to contribute significantly toward their retirement, but we're on the hook for their retirement payments. What are we going to do about that in terms of addressing this bill that looms over us that we refer to as the unfunded pension liability?
Well, just to give your viewers a little context, our value of our pension funds, as I said, is about $50 billion. Our unfunded liability is between $18.5 and $18.8 billion left over from the past. So we've got to deal with that. And the legislature is going to probably this year lengthen out the payment period during which we can fully pay that down to the year 2040. But at the same time, the governor has proposed, I'm supporting, as other legislative leaders are supporting, pension reform that can save the Commonwealth and our cities and towns $5 billion. Now, how do we do that?
So let me just, again, this is kind of in the category of boring but important. This is actually
important.
Real important stuff. And the Treasurer is explaining it, and I'll try to just maybe dumb it down a little bit because your knowledge is so vast. I think that listeners hearing it for the first time may get lost. So we're looking to, we have $18 billion or so of pension liability that we don't have money socked away for yet. So we have $50 billion, but our obligations exceed that by $18 billion. So we're supposed to pay that money down, get rid of that $18 billion unfunded liability.
By the year 2040, if we change the law this year.
Well, 2030 now, I think, and we're pushing it out 10 years or so to 2040. But rather than just kick the can down the road, we also are going to make some significant reforms, which are getting wide praise from bond rating agencies like Standard & Poor's.
Well, there are actually three things we're doing. First of all, we're going to do some pension reform, which will save $5 billion over that period of time. What are the three key ingredients of pension reform? We're going to raise the retirement age by 5 years. We are going to eliminate the incentives for early retirement. And we are going to recalculate the way pensions are figured for 5-year average as opposed to 3-year average. Those three major reforms will save us $5 billion. In addition to that, all of the taxpayers who are watching this program should know that we put into the state budget every year about $1.5 billion set aside to help pay those pension funds and to fund our pensions. That number is going to increase by 5 to 6% every year starting next year. So by 2017, it'll be up to $2 billion. Third, we need to seek superior performance. So the combination of increasing the value of the pension funds by good investing, pension reform to save $5 billion between now and 2040, and going ahead and increasing the amount of money that taxpayers in the budget are putting into the state budget, that, if it all works out well, will get us to the year 2040. We will be fully funded, and there will be no additional burden on our grandchildren and on our great-grandchildren. That's the goal, and that requires ironclad discipline, and I know you and others are dedicated to doing exactly that, living within our means.
Okay, so again, just to explain to our viewers, we're unlike the federal government. Here on the state government level, we have a balanced budget requirement so that we simply cannot spend money that we don't have in our operating budget. The Senate will be coming out with our budget next week. It's about $30 billion we're anticipating the state budget to be this year. But then there's long-term spending. There's capital investment in our roads and bridges and public buildings and infrastructure. Those we borrow for. That's the proper way to do it, to borrow against that, the life of that asset. And what the Treasurer is talking about here by having this fiscal discipline and prudence, we've reduced our cost of borrowing. It's interesting, there are a number of rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Moody's and Fitch and others, that look at public entities, look at the states, look at municipalities, and I think right now Massachusetts is the only state in the union that the rating agencies have given a positive outlook to.
Actually, they just added one to it. So Tennessee joined Massachusetts, the only two states since 2007 to get a positive outlook. And what does that mean? It means that Standard & Poor's is looking at us and they're saying they're disciplined. Their budget process between the Senate, the House, and the governor is done in a way that is living within our means. We're engaging in serious reform, pension reform being a specific example. We had 2 months, the last 2 months, the months of March and April, when our tax revenues grew by over $750 million more than had been expected. I believe we will be one of the very few states that will end this fiscal year by June 30th with a rainy day fund or a stabilization fund or a savings account, if you will, that's going to be in excess of $1 billion. So the bond rating agencies are looking at Massachusetts and saying they have an innovation economy, they're growing some jobs, they avoided a lot of the real estate toxic problems that other states did, they're living within their means, they're reforming, and that kind of predictability and stability is sending a message to the rating agencies. And it's all going to come home positively for us starting this Friday, because this week we go ahead and sell $518 million of bonds to the public, including...
So let me talk about that, because, again, if you're paying attention, this fellow's been on the job 4 months, and his expertise is quite evident. So this week, we're going to go out and issue a bond. The state is going to borrow money, which is normal practice, just as it's normal for you to perhaps finance your home through a mortgage of 30 years. It's quite standard for the state to finance its capital projects through bonding or borrowing. And you have an interesting idea now. This is quite cool. Because Massachusetts is a terrific place to invest, and because so many of our taxpayers would like to invest on their home turf, you've come up with a new program.
Yeah, because up till now, when bonds were sold, the minimum amount of money that you could invest in a bond, one bond, is a $5,000 face amount. And a lot of people don't have $5,000 in their savings account. They'd like to invest in Massachusetts because we give a good interest rate and the money is solid and protected. So we came up with the idea, for the first time in 21 years, the Commonwealth is actually going to be selling bonds with a face amount of $1,000. So anybody who's watching can say, I'd like to do that. I'd like to buy one of our bonds. I'd like to invest in Massachusetts. And now I can go right to a website, which is buildmassbonds.com or buymassachusettsbonds.com, one of those two websites. And they can get a list of 26 different brokers, financial advisors, and they can go ahead and buy a bond with a $1,000 face amount. We're going to start selling them on Friday the 20th. We're going to conclude the selling period on the 23rd. And lots of our fellow citizens living all over the Commonwealth can go ahead and invest $1,000, get a good interest rate, and invest in the future of this Commonwealth. And we want to make it accessible to people. I'm bullish on Massachusetts. I'm excited about our future. And I want the rest of the citizens to be able to invest in that as well.
We're not live television here, so I'm not sure if we'll be on the air before May 20th. But this is a program you anticipate going forward.
Exactly.
So in the old days, maybe your dad or your grandparents might have invested in war bonds in order to help the effort. Here, Massachusetts citizens will have an opportunity to invest in Massachusetts in a pretty darn safe investment. So that, I mean, you anticipate this for, bar mitzvahs or First Holy Communion or graduation presents to...
Or just as a pure straight investment. And if people don't get a chance to participate in this bond offering, as you know, Brian, because you lead the effort to look at our bonding, in the next fiscal year, starting on July 1, we have a bond cap. We can borrow up to $1.75 billion. So we're going to be issuing bonds throughout the next fiscal year. And anybody who's listening, if they're interested in this program, can go on and take a look at this. Build Mass Bonds is the website, and can figure out and can go to one of their financial advisors or a broker and buy a $1,000 bond. We're going to try to make $1,000 bonds accessible to every citizen of this Commonwealth who's got $1,000 to invest.
What's the typical maturity on those bonds?
Well, those are short maturities. Those are 2 years and 8 months. They'll mature on February 1st of 2014. A lot of the bonds we'll sell will mature in 15 years. But we wanted a short-term piece of paper, if you will.
Will there be a tax benefit to buying these bonds?
Sure, there are no taxes, either federal or state, on any municipal securities. And any general obligations, what they're called, bonds of the Commonwealth, they're fully tax-free from the federal or the state. So you pay no taxes whatsoever on those bonds, on the income that you receive from those bonds.
So you'll have an opportunity to invest in Massachusetts,
Right.
to get a tax-free return and a very strong, safe investment. So that's
Exactly.
terrific. So you're in charge of the day-to-day cash needs of the state. You're in charge of the long-term debt obligations. You oversee the extraordinary challenge of investing the state's pension funds and ensuring that we address this unfunded pension liability. What are some of the other things you do as state
I oversee
treasurer?
the lottery.
Oversee the lottery,
Yeah.
okay.
And people may not know this, but the lottery is a $4.5 billion business.
Well, here's the thing on that, because people say, are we going to have gambling in Massachusetts? And we've had gambling in Massachusetts since the 70s, when the voters, through a popular referendum, adopted
40
the state
years
lottery.
ago.
40 years
1971.
40 years. And then it was a single number drawing.
Right.
And so that's instructive as we do look at casinos and slots, how much that original single weekly drawing has expanded and how state government becomes dependent upon it. So we know that once
Right.
we open this next door, it's never going to be closed, yet it's likely to be expanded. So that's instructive. But so the answer to the first question, are we going to have gambling in Massachusetts? I always answer, we already do. It's just a question,
Right.
we're going to expand it into slots and casinos.
Well, I support the expansion of gaming in Massachusetts. I do think that we're going to get some economic benefit. $400 million of additional revenue, 15,000 jobs. I mean, think of all the people you and I know who are in the construction trades, who haven't worked in 2 or 3 winters. Think of the unemployment rate out there, and we can put 15,000 people to work. But more than that, I think it will benefit us, and we'll get some additional funds for local aid.
One of the things I looked at as a new legislator, I remember there was a big push to have the Boston Convention Center built, and there were proponents that proffered numbers that just were never realized. That if we, make this investment, it's going to be, hundreds of millions of dollars into the economy, hundreds of millions of in jobs
Right.
and derivative benefits and the like. And it was an interesting lesson for me in that whoever is pushing a particular item or for or against often is is skewing their numbers. So I've looked very, very carefully at this. I agree that it has a net positive benefit to the state. Comes with potential negatives as
True.
well. It's not not a black and white issue. It's a somewhat complicated. But I do think we're going to do something this year, and it's likely that you'll be the person that's in charge.
Well, whether I'm in charge or simply I'm one of the 3 people, according to one of the bills that was out there last year, who makes the choice of who the commission members are, the leadership who oversee this, at the end of the day, it will affect the lottery. Nobody knows exactly how much. We have the most successful lottery in the United States here in Massachusetts. Generated last year $900 million of profit, the bulk of which went right back into local aid for every one of our cities and towns.
So that funds your schools, your public works, keeps pressure off your local property taxes. That lottery, that money comes back to cities and towns.
Exactly. And I've got some ideas as to how to increase that. I made a campaign pledge that I would do my very best to increase the profits of the lottery from $900 million to $1 billion, so another $100 million. So how are we going to do that? Well, I've got an idea. We're going to implement, assuming the Senate budget approves it and the House budget has already approved it, we're going to create a new raffle game next year. We're going to sell in twice a year 1 million tickets, raffle tickets at $20 a ticket. We're going to cut it off at 1 million. And we're going to do a raffle the way other states have done. That can generate another $17 million of profit.
So by expanding going back to the casino gambling and the slots, you're talking about an expansion of $400 million for our local economy, for our state economy?
Over and above what the lottery is currently generating. That's the casinos.
Okay.
Those would be the destination casinos.
That takes into account the potentially adverse impact on the lottery. Okay.
It does. And those are numbers that have come either from the Mass Taxpayers Foundation or from the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. So I think those are reasonably solid numbers. And I agree with you. People who are promoting something are always trying to promote the numbers and make the numbers look better than they really are. But I look for independent people.
One of the numbers that I found most interesting, we're going to have to wrap up, one of the numbers is, I think would be about the 40th or the 41st state to have this expanded gambling. I mean, it's quite prevalent. And how much of our citizens' dollars are going to Rhode Island and Connecticut and New York? It's extraordinary. So
a lot.
Yeah,
so a lot. And finally, the thing I want to say is, I'm a pretty old-fashioned guy. When you make a campaign promise, good idea to try to keep it. So one of the things that I'm working on now, in partnership with others in state government, is to put the state's checkbook online. I promised it during the campaign. Every citizen has a right to know how every dime is being spent. And when we get to October of this year, the state's checkbook will be online. And any of your viewers who want to go online and check it out can find out how every penny of their taxpayers' money is being spent. That's just common sense to let the people who pay the bills know how we're spending it.
Well, I tell you, when Steve Grossman came on as a candidate, I told you I thought this guy was very, very good, and he certainly lived up to that expectation. A very, very impressive individual indeed, has already impressed all of us at the State House with his talent, his dedication, his hard work, and doing his homework as a steward of the state's treasurer. So I thank you very, very much for joining us. I'm impressed. We'll have you back next year. It'll become an annual event.
Well, it's a great partnership. I've enjoyed it, your friendship, and look forward to working with you over these next 4 years to make a lot of things happen for the taxpayers of your district and for this Commonwealth.
That's it for today. I'm Senator Brian Joyce, and I hope you've enjoyed our program.